We had no clients, no income. What have I done? And I remember thinking at one point, like, how quickly, if I need to, can I sell the house? There's certain times in life that are great for doing things that this just wasn't a good time.
You had a young family at the time. You're literally looking at your pay slips and saying, how long is this going to last me? Dan, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. Could you just give us a bit of background about who you are and your journey to get to where you are today? Because we've had a call before this. I understand that you work for a company. Well, do you work for the company or is it acquired? I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah. Complications of those things. Well, great to be here. I'm honoured to be asked. So background, I think I've worked in the sports industry my entire career. One of those things that actually, when we got acquired, my business partner, who you'll probably hear reference Archie quite a lot throughout this conversation, we were asked that question. It was the first question actually in the thing. Why did you get into the sports industry? And he had this really articulate answer about being interested in the business of sport. Mine was that I just loved sport, played sport, anything with sport in. And actually, I'm slightly hypocritical because when I interview people and they say that in their interview, I'm always like, oh, it's not a really good answer. But it was the case. And so I ended up getting a summer internship post university at a sports agency, one of the sort of what is now quite a big sports agency, and did that for sort of 4 years. And I always say it's quite a good place to start in one of the bigger businesses before maybe going into doing anything entrepreneurial, because you kind of learn just what it's like to work in a big business if that's what you're trying to emulate. So that was really good. But quite quickly, I realized I was probably too opinionated and too much wanting to kind of like influence things to thrive on that ladder of being in a big agency where you sort of bit by bit work your way up from account graduate to account executive, senior executive manager. That just kind of did not excite my personality type, and so I actually had a little bit of an opportunity or entrepreneurialism within that business where I was kind of doing something that other people weren't, and I tried to set up a division within the business. I was about 24, 25, and they sort of said, well, if it comes off, great, and if it doesn't don't worry about it. So I felt that's not quite the support or motivation I needed.
Yeah.
And I came across a business, just a job opportunity it was a marketing manager in what was a startup. And I didn't really know what startup really was, but I knew it was kind of small and all the benefits of that kind of thing. Did a job interview in a cafe. I think quite purposefully didn't show me the office in quotation marks, and then left this really plush office with like Xboxes and Wiis and coffee machines and like a view over the Thames, and turned up on my first day in this like bedroom with a bunch of 4 other people, 2 of which were sat on cardboard boxes because there weren't enough chairs. And I was like, what have I done? But it was the best decision I ever made, really. I sort of was part of this startup business in mass participation sports. So I'd moved from professional sports to things like marathons and triathlons, etc., which is a great place to work, great fun. And what it did is it enabled me to kind of jump a few rungs of the ladder. So after sort of 6 years of being there, I left as commercial director. We sold that business. So I sort of was part of the exec management team and went through the process of growing and being part of an exit and kind of observing that. Not as close to the exit as obviously was recently, but really kind of understanding what that even meant, what equity meant, what sort of share options meant, all those sorts of things. And then just after exiting that, another opportunity came up within another, not quite startup, but a 2-year-old business, which was in sports technology. So again, a sort of a bit of a change from pro sports to mass participation to sports technology. But again, I felt that technology was the future. Obviously, it was a really exciting area. Joined that business as head of strategy, and within 3 months was made chief commercial officer.
Wow.
And I pretty much shadowed the CEO of that business for 6 years. And ran 4 of the 5 divisions of that business. And coincidentally, one of the other co-founders, who is now my business partner, was also there. He was chief strategy officer. So I did that for 6 years. So I was doing lots within all of this, but this is the kind of the expedited version. And then got to a point where I'd realised that I'd spent 12 years across those 2 businesses shadowing CEOs and founders, and treating it like it was my own, because my personality type was just that whatever I do, I just have to give it everything. I felt that I almost was running, was sort of owning these businesses, despite, financially not owning them.
Yeah.
And then I think there becomes a time when, in those scenarios, all parties go, it was great, having you on the ride, but it's probably time to spread your wings. And I felt that the best way to do that was to do something of my own. And so it was a weird scenario, because often if you're going to start a business, I always had this vision that you'd kind of come up with this great idea and be like, here's a great idea, I'm going to go and start a business. And what I felt was, I want to start a business, I need to think of a great idea, which is quite a different way around. So my colleague at the time was also in a similar mindset. So we sat down together and we got literally Post-it notes, and we both wrote down 3 things that we really wanted from like the next phase of our career, and tied that to things that we felt were opportunities in the industry that we'd both worked in for 17 years or something at that point. And we showed them to each other, and we'd both written the exact same thing. I wish I could remember exactly what we'd written, but there were things related to wanting to be closer towards IP investment and M&A within our sector. Wanted just certain areas of our sector we wanted to be close to. And so we kind of looked at each other and were like, maybe we should do something together. And before we knew it, we'd sort of shared that view with our the current rest of the C-suite and investors of the business we were in. And without really taking the decision, it was just upon us in a weird way that we were now setting up a business. So we set up a business literally during our 3-month notice period, that we had no clients, no income, both with young families, and this I actually had a holiday booked for the first week of the new business, which was quite amusing, which I nearly cancelled. And then the day before we started, I got a phone call. Before I was on holiday, the day before the business officially started, to say, we've got a client. We had our first client. And so then very, very quickly, and again, I'm sort of jumping many phases, but very, very quickly within that business, I think it was within 8 months or something, we were acquired within the business we now sit part of. So, I don't know if that gave you the
roller coaster rides, but there's actually a lot to unpack. And I'm actually going to start with the going to work for the startup, because one of the guests who was on recently, a guy called Phil Fraser, he spoke about the best piece of advice he would give to someone who's entrepreneurially minded is go and work for a startup, because you learn everything. You learn how to bootstrap, you learn how to, basically, you've got so much responsibility, because it's all hands on deck. And as you say, like, you've got a few of you just sitting in a bedroom, like on cardboard boxes, like you understand like how to properly run a business lean. What do you think about that advice? Would you say that that's something that gave you a lot of the tools that were required to start your own business?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think when I'm interviewing people, I often ask them to reflect on. There's a two-way thing. So obviously, do we want to hire them, and do they want the job? And I always think to like reflect on their personality type. Are you somebody who wants to kind of sit in a big business and have that security and have that comfort, but probably in this narrow remit, or are you somebody who will thrive in an unstructured environment where everything is the world is your oyster, as it were, and every opportunity is yours to take, but there are all the challenges and stresses that come with it. Forget the risk of whether that startup works or not, but actually just the day-to-day environment that you have to operate in and being self-sufficient. And so that's the first part of it. It's like, can you operate in this environment where there isn't such thing as a appraisal or a pathway towards a promotion? Job titles don't really mean anything. I know a lot of people come in and go, well, I want this job title. It's kind of irrelevant. Have whatever job title you want, type thing. So that's part. Can you throw that? And then the second part is like, if you do thrive in that environment, you will learn things that are, from creating a culture, not just going into a culture, but what does that mean? What does like high performance and successful culture feel like, and how do you build that? From things like structuring, the organization and the team shapes. There's no model for that, through to the stuff that I love and probably thrive on the most is building, your corporate message and your brand message and your the way that you sell, the way that you report, the way you differentiate yourself from your competitors, understanding who your competitive set are, having being part of a business vision, not having a 3-month or 6-month or 12-month target against your role, but looking at, what does, enterprise value look like. These are all things that I probably take for granted now, but having been through 3 startups is just day-to-day life, and couldn't recommend it more.
Yeah, you've said a few really important things there, but you mentioned at the start about interviewing people. When, first of all, it's a 2-way process. I think some people forget this. Usually when you go for an interview, you get so sort of like enamored by the job and this prospect that you almost like want it, irrespective of like who you're sitting in front of. But when you're looking to interview somebody, what characteristics are you looking for? Are you looking for somebody who is entrepreneurially minded, or are you looking for someone who can come in and do the role? Or is it different between the roles that you're hiring for?
It's great. I got asked that exact question by a recruiter the other day, and it's an interesting one. I think that the hardest thing is what we tried to show before is that characteristic around where they thrive in this type of environment. And there's definitely been ones that almost within weeks, I always say it's like going on a date. You kind of sit down for dinner, and then by the time you've got past the starter, you kind of know if that's going to work or not. And you've got to try to get, almost in this instance, you've got to get to that point before you actually get down and sit down for the meal. And it doesn't always work out like that. And so you're trying to just assess not somebody's experience. Almost most of the roles that I've tried to recruit for don't have and people in HR will probably kill me now, but don't have a job spec. I often meet people and then create a role. And I find that that's because when you're meeting with, you don't actually quite know what's going to work. And you've got so many, when you're thinking about a startup, you've probably got 10 roles you need at any one time. So there's no priority. Like, definitely got to hire the salesperson, or I need somebody in strategy, I need some support. So you sort of meet people and you're trying to work out how they can blend. And so you're then looking for people who are, I guess, multifaceted quite a lot, that are, malleable, that will offer, somebody always says to me, make sure you recruit people that do things that you can't do or are better than you, which is actually quite a common thing. So you're trying to find like what's the role. If you're building a football team, you don't want 10 strikers, that kind of thing. So I don't think there's a specific skill set you're looking for, but you're looking to build that team, that starting 11, and just trying to piece together based on however many of those pieces you already have. Yeah.
Are you looking for mentality when you're talking to these people?
Yeah, mentality is like absolutely huge, particularly that point around being self-starter, being like driven to go the extra mile. Like, I think if you get the opportunity to work in a startup, that the word that is an opportunity, and so you want to know who's going to thrive with that. There are people who get on the train home and are scrolling through social media, or there are people who are kind of in our world, which is in advertising, marketing, branding, who are looking at the adverts around them and sort of thinking around how does that impact their job or things that they could be doing within the business. So you're looking for those people that that not because they want to impress or just want to go further, but because they actually enjoy that. Like, that's part of their people in my old business probably got sick of me always saying, like, I was thinking in the shower, which is a really weird thing to say, but like, I'm always thinking. I probably had too long in the shower because that's when I'm thinking about stuff. Yeah. So are you somebody that thinks about the opportunities in the shower, or are you somebody that's kind of gets to your desk? And that's probably the mentality piece.
Yeah, I would say that what you've just described there is the person who I am as well. So I remember very early in my career, I guess my differentiator was that I thought about the markets, or I thought about my job all the time, maybe to my detriment, but like weekends I'd be reading financial news, and sometimes I'd even text my colleagues and say, I've just come across this really good idea. What do you think about it? And they go, it's Saturday morning, like, get a life. It's like, this is my life. Like, I love what I do. And you can't really teach that, I don't think. But is that the sort of person that you were? Like, if you cast yourself all the way back to when you first stepped into the workplace, you said that you would like be proposing ideas as a 24-year-old. Have you always been like that?
I think it came late to me, actually, which is quite strange, because I think in my personality I'm quite obsessive, and I'm very I kind of OCD about a lot of things. But I'm either all in or all out. That's kind of, so I think with my career and even when before my career, I remember being at university and there was one of my colleagues who has now got a really successful career, and he was at university constantly reading the FT, constantly researching stuff to do with a potential career, and I was just on the Astro playing football with mates, and I just didn't have that desire. But there would have been something else in life that I was incredibly passionate about. It was probably playing sport, to be honest, and like competition and those sorts of things, fitness. Like I became like really sort of I guess obsessed with in a healthy way in those days. So I think it took a while for that healthy obsession I hope healthy to become about business and career. But then when that sparked, then that's it. And then everything you say, like Archie and I will if it's a Saturday and my wife and daughter are away or whatever, and I'm just driving in the car, I'll be excited to try and hope that Archie's free so we can talk about something to do with business, because that's I'd much want to do that as talk about any other topic, really.
Yeah, this is Julia, so I think sometimes she probably gets a little bit tired of me just always talking about like what's going. I'm a very observational person. You said earlier on that you want people to be looking around at the branding and that sort of thing. Well, I'm a very observational person, and somebody asked me recently, like, where'd you get your ideas from for like, your LinkedIn posts or whatever? And I'm like, it's almost like observational comedy. It's like you look at things that are going on around you and how that impacts what you're doing. And when you're an investor, when you're always trying to understand like what's going on in the world and how does that actually translate to the economy, into markets and stuff. And I don't know, like that's something that I also find it a bit obsessive, and I think it's a bit of a superpower, I guess. But as you say, like you've got to, I guess, channel that obsession in the right way. So let's go back all the way to the start of starting the business. You said earlier on that you had a young family at the time. How were you feeling when you decided to go away and do that?
Incredibly nervous, like really nervous. There's like certain times in life that are great for doing things that this just wasn't a good time. I would say, like, people say I'm going to go traveling for a couple of years. Great time, young, single, go traveling. Or I'm going to start a business. Maybe it's a good time when you've just been made redundant, or there's a reason, there's something, particular opportunity. Nothing was broken. And so, I had, my daughter was like 2 at the time. I obviously had my wife on, she should obviously finish maternity leave, but we were sort of, nothing was broken. And there was just the idea of suddenly going to, you've got mortgage, you've got other things to pay for. And then all of a sudden to this idea of just having no income. And it got more and more nervy as we got closer and closer to starting, and you start looking at runway. And I remember thinking at one point, like, okay, like how quickly, if I need to, can I sell the house? And like how quickly, if I need to, can I like sell the car, and those sorts of things. Like I was, really trying to plan all those things out. And yeah, so it was a nerve-wracking time. Luckily didn't have to, but
well, exactly. And I think that, we just had the budget yesterday. So there was in the build-up, there was a lot of, I guess, trepidation about what Labour would do in terms of, because they were trying to define who a working person is, right? So, which they sort of created their own problems. But talking about working person as someone that sort of gets a pay slip. However, you're talking about the possibility of having to sell your house. And as an entrepreneur, I mean, like those two things. As an entrepreneur, you're probably working more than the average person. You're putting a lot on the line and taking a lot of risks. And I think that entrepreneurs should be celebrated. And that's the main reason for the podcast, is that I think that in the UK, there's a bit of I called it an ambition crisis recently, but we don't celebrate entrepreneurialism. We don't try to encourage people to aspire to be like much better. And using the example there, like it's a scary time. You've got a young family. Like you're literally looking at your pay slips or your money in the bank and saying, how long is this going to last me? Before maybe having to decide to go back to work for another company.
Yeah, I obviously we're going to be on the same side of the fence on this one, and but I couldn't agree more. I just feel that it's completely overlooking what it took to get into that position and the risks that were taken, and basically sort of saying, well, yes, you're doing okay now, and so we can do that, but actually, so are we better off as a nation or just to kind of sit on our hands and play it safe? So yeah, we could go into a whole political podcast, but I think I'm completely on your side of the fence, obviously, on that one.
So what did those early days then of starting the business look like? Like, how did you go out there and find clients, for example? Because I think that's where a number of people that will be listening will be saying, great, like, you've got your business now that's been acquired, like, but how did you go about the early stages of setting it up and finding clients and then, making it actually work?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we're a B2B business, and so I guess the benefit of that is the network that you built up. And so we were fortunate enough to be in a position where we felt confident. I think in the first startup I joined, we were much more B2C. We were reliant on income, particularly from selling tickets to events, and that's almost more nervy because it's completely out of your hands. And if it's not like you can just ring up thousands of people and get them to buy these tickets. It's just, you're just kind of waiting, looking at these numbers ticking up or not. So there is a certain level of comfort in the ability to kind of use your network to kind of get that head start. And I think that's where, when we sat down to kind of plan what we were going to do as a business, and again, it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't that we had this great idea. It was, let's build something that we believe will be successful. One, that we're the right people to do, and two, that the market kind of needs. And so we kind of looked at, like, what did we have as individuals? Because ultimately, in those early days in a B2B services business, you're just selling your own, you're selling your own time. I think what Archie and I looked at was, what is going to be valuable that we have to sell within the market as individuals? Because ultimately, when you're starting a services business and it's B2B, really at the very beginning, it's just you're selling your own time, your own capabilities. And so we felt that there were a few projects that we'd worked on in the past that we'd been kind of quite unique to us and had got a lot of traction, but there was no business really focusing or specializing on that area. So that was like the first part. And then the second part was being really, really focused on that. Once we'd established this is where we think we can win, let's just do it loads. Because Archie always says, and he'll love that he's getting some credit for this, but it's a really, really good point. When you're in a B2B business, particularly in a services business, there are lots of boxes that a potential buyer might have, and you need to make sure you fit into one of those boxes. And the problem is, if you fit into too many of those boxes, it's quite hard for them when something comes up to know to call you. So either I'm going to run an RFP or I've got a problem. When should I pick up the phone to Dan and Archie, as it was at the time? And so we wanted to have this fit into one box really, really, really well. And that served us. I have to say that was the most important part of making this business successful. And to this day, like, we've almost drifted from that box a couple of times. We just keep going back to it, almost until it runs out. I mean, we're obviously building other boxes, but it's a really, really, really important aspect to everything that we do, really.
So what was that box?
So our background over the previous business we had been building sports technology.
Okay.
And what was interesting about sports technology is, for the 10 years, I don't know how many years it would be, everybody was talking about how sports technology is going to change the industry for sport in terms of the way it monetizes itself. And what the challenge that people had is that through the different monetization strands that they have, so in sport, your monetization verticals are your media revenues. You get your share of the broadcast revenue from the league. If you are the league, you've negotiated that with your broadcaster. The second business vertical is your commercial and sponsorship revenue, which is typically, in most organizations, the largest controllable revenue stream that they have. And then your third vertical is kind of your direct sales. So you have ticket sales, F&B, merchandise, anything else that you might sell to your audience. So those are kind of your buckets. And so people had invested in technology for all of those areas. So I want to be able to stream directly to my audiences. I want to be able to capture more people on my websites and learn data about them because I can sell that to sponsors, or I want to be able to monetize all of these fans that I have via these direct methods through different technologies. And we were building those technologies. And what sort of happened is lots of other industries had really found ways to make technology pay, but sport hadn't, and it felt like people were becoming disillusioned with the investments that they were making. And so some had started reducing their investment in technology, and others just had massive internal pressures to look at how do they make this pay. And we were in this scenario where both of our previous careers had been in commercialization of sports rights. Our current careers were in, or experience was in sports technology. And we felt that actually we could be the people that could make tech pay. And so there were boxes that people had for sponsorship sales with major agencies, and boxes that they had for monetization, again with major agencies. But we wanted to just carve out almost a corner of those boxes to say, look, just the technology part of that just needs different treatment to how you might be doing all the rest of your monetization strategies. And so we won projects with some of the biggest sports organizations in the world. Like our roster of clients was like probably four of the 5 most valuable sports entities in the world, and we which is obviously great in terms of getting an early acquisition, and we were able to do that by having a little box within an existing box.
So you niche down basically, really tightly to find out what are you the absolute specialist in, and what is nobody else doing well. Yeah, exactly that. And then the temptation to stray from that, as I mentioned, when suddenly lots of opportunities start coming up, and we did for a tiny bit start straying away from that. And it's a constant debate that we have, because you want to grow and expand, but you also, if you lose being known for something, and there's so much more to go at within our little box within the box. So yeah, it was a niche, but actually like a really, really valuable niche. I mean, we did a project for somebody that one of our first clients that yielded a 5 times ROI for them on what was already a 8-figure sum of revenue. Wow. And so we were able to trade off of that quite well and say, look what we've done for one of the biggest organizations in the world. And that's been, it's been served us really well. So when you were acquired, were you looking to be acquired at this point? Like, was your ambition to grow this business and then sell it, or did it sort of happen organically? So when we started the business, we did a round robin of kind of just going through everyone in our LinkedIns. LinkedIn is probably the best term, and just so many coffees, which was great actually, reconnecting with old colleagues, etc. And one of the things that we found were there were lots of very small businesses or really, really big businesses. There weren't too many in our sector that were kind of in the middle. And the differentiation was typically investment. And there was a threshold that the smaller businesses had kind of all hit. It was almost the exact same amount of revenue. I didn't know too much necessarily about their profits, but conversations with friendly faces, they'd all hit this same threshold of revenue. And the reason being is like the ability, again, in the services, like from technology businesses, a bit different, because one, you typically get a fundraise, but secondly, you've got this long tail recurring revenue that you're trying to build, and as you build that gives you a runway to invest and grow. In a services business, you're quite hand to mouth, and so the leap of faith to either recruit ahead of the curve to drive real growth, or to staff up in any way really, is very, very difficult. And so credit to people that have taken no investment and built really significant services business. But for us, our ambition as individuals to do something that actually made an impact in the industry. We really wanted to be, a significant player in the industry with what we were doing. So investment was kind of what we were looking at initially. And then we felt, should that investment come from an industry investor, or should it come from sort of, a typical capital investor? And there was just a very unique opportunity in time that we came across a business that was a PE-backed business and had huge growth in North America over a very short period of time. Astonishingly large organization with over 1,000 employees, but nothing anywhere else in the world. And we just felt earlier than we wanted to sort of be acquired, as it were, because they felt there was so much more of a journey to go, that there was the opportunity to have that resource, ambition and scale was probably a once in a lifetime opportunity. Right. And so we were kind of ended up in this position of acquisition
probably having initially gone looking for investment.
Yeah. So are they then allowing you to fulfill your ambition, which was to then invest money into the business and then grow it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because we're on camera, but it's been amazing. They, I was one of the sort of the CEO of the global business, and obviously the sort of lead board member. We were discussing some recruitment opportunities in the last few weeks, and to sum up, to answer your question, the phrase was, it's your business. I just give you my opinion, but you guys go with it, and we're trusted to do that. I think that's absolutely key. And so I suppose doing your due diligence on who you're going into bed with is massively important. But they are great people, and they absolutely value and trust us. And ultimately, there are differences, between. Predominantly Europe is predominantly where our business operates, and North America. And so I think the fact that they, as such a large organization, are cognizant and supportive of our opinion to really make us pretty self-sufficient and have autonomy is amazing credit to them.
And has it allowed you to then grow your business? Have you employed more staff, for example, to try to reach what you were trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's almost slightly the other way. Like the desire and the requirements from them as an organisation is go faster, go bigger, really? Which is probably very North American, which is great. And we are always sort of cognizant of being the people putting the handbrake on, but when you're in the depths of the detail, and sometimes it's very exciting when you're presenting to an ownership group or an investment group, because you've got to get that balance between not trying to sell and go in and go, we've done this deal and that deal, because in a way you are trying to impress or and make them feel like they've made a good decision. The flip side is that they need to understand the risks. You're all in it together. So we will sometimes go in and go, we've got a new client win. They go faster, and we're there presenting, well, here's the challenges that could come, here's the potential risks. And that was something I learned very much in the last business that I was in, that halfway through that business, we flipped board meetings with our investors, which were VC in that business, from being us going in trying to show how well we were doing to us going in and making them part of the journey with us and using those meetings as advisory, advice and support, as opposed to the former. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I've had some people on the podcast so far who have gone to angel investors to raise capital, and who are often silent angel investors. So they don't go to them for those bits of advice when they're coming to like a crossroads in the business. But are you leaning on the parent company to be like, and the advisors on the board, for example, to say like, what would you recommend that we do in this position?
Definitely. Like that is the point of when we come out of a board meeting, Archie and I will always say like, how good was that board meeting, or like assess it, but we don't mean like how good was our performance showing. So what did we get from that? Like if you go into a meeting, you're going into that meeting to try and get something that's going to help you move the business forward. In our current situation, we have a tactic typically, which is just to try and really have one thing we want to achieve from each board meeting. Really? And so we will, there'll be like 15 minutes of general business update, and then the rest of the time, depending on how long the meeting will be, is trying to sort of, because it's quite rare in a business of the scale as well that you're going to get those individuals focused in a room talking about these big strategic priorities. So that it's absolutely, I can't remember what the question was now, but
Is there one piece of advice that you've gained from those board meetings that's like really resonated with you and stuck with you?
I think on the topic of going faster, what's really easy is to fall within your comfort zone. It's really easy to do that, and so it's been a great opportunity for us to question ourselves. And actually, if you look at the runway for the classic hockey stick that everybody's always trying to create, if you are pacing ahead, it's very easy to feel comfortable and say, well, we're ahead now, so we'll be ahead in the future. But actually, that pacing ahead could be because you're under investing. And sometimes going into a board meeting and saying we're doing really, really well is setting yourself up for future failure. And so I think I hope when I look at the next few years, one of the most valuable pieces of feedback will have been that push for us to almost come back to budget, to not try and be too ambitious too early, and to make sure that we're investing so that we have the momentum that we need for the next phase of growth.
Yeah, is that a bit of a conflict between like your mindset that you said earlier on, which is like very ambitious and you want to, but then also trying to taper it down a little bit? Like how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think ambition, I guess it depends what you're ambitious about. So if you want to grow something that's very successful, I don't think ambition necessarily means doing that quickly. I think part of that ambition is lots of little wins along the way, being able to have a great team, being able to enjoy the process of what you're doing, winning, so a landmark deal or a landmark client. So, there's certainly in our field, no rush we need to be overnight, be the biggest business in our space. So I don't think those two things actually conflict with each other, because ambition and timing are not necessarily always linear with each other, I suppose.
So then do you have like just an ultimate goal that you're trying to work towards, and then it's about the strategic steps you need to put in place just to get to that, and then almost being like laser focused on how do we do that?
So ultimate goal is a really interesting phrase, because I was thinking about that on the way here, because I thought we might talk about something like this. It's a slight insight, I guess, into my psyche. But so I'm hugely competitive, as everyone who knows me would definitely say, but not just with others, also with myself. But also through the things I was mentioning earlier about sort of my levels of OCD, I would say, I also have this always have to be on a progressive journey. So when I used to play computer games when I was younger, the way that they are designed and the way that I would also get hooked on them is that there's no end. There is no goal. It's like the reason they're brilliant, and we did a lot of this when we were designing products ourselves, is they kind of continually give you something else to chase. But similarly, somebody that's competitive typically wants to win. And so what does winning look like when there's no end? Yeah. No end. So, and I have to have an end. If I'm reading my daughter a book when she was going to sleep, if she falls asleep, I have to keep reading until the book's finished. Or if I'm playing sport or anyone, and if everyone goes, okay, we've just finished now, I'll say, well, let's just do next one wins, or let's just do something so that there is an end. So when you translate that to business, it's really interesting, because there is no winner, there's no end. You're just constantly trying to go bigger or do more and more. So you can see how some of these great entrepreneurs, be that in real life, through to Succession, where really what that is about is that nobody really wants to be succeeded, because they want to just keep going and keep going. Because I think if you're a lot of people who are entrepreneurially minded, there is no end goal. It's just you just want to keep on that journey of growth and improvement. Yeah, continuous development and improvement. And that's, again, I think that if I had to try to summarize the ideal listener here, it is somebody just like that. The person who is looking to make incremental improvements all the time through podcasts, through reading, through just like everything they do in their day-to-day lives. So it's actually quite nice that you actually summarize that too, because again, the reason why I started the podcast and called it Ambitious Minds is exactly for that reason. I listen to podcasts to get my advice, I guess, to try to like learn as much as possible, so that you can almost make like 1% increment steps up all the time. Do you do anything like that too? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you where do you get like, your information from to do that? So a couple of different things. One is I love observing those around me that I've worked with or working with, and I do feel like in my own character as a leader in a business today, I can see the bits of the leaders that I've worked with that coming through, and that's why I do admire and find it amazing the people who will build a business at university and then go on to be a huge entrepreneur. I guess from that perspective, it's about surrounding yourself with people that can support in different ways. But then, the only books that I would read, and I'm not a big reader actually, but which is weird because I shouldn't say most people, it's like all the successful CEOs say that they read like 10 books a week or something. But if I do, it will be a entrepreneur's autobiography or a book around that, more so than just a business sort of advice book. I love people's actual stories. Love to hear the challenges that they went through. I think people in my office are sick of me quoting the Pour Your Heart Into It, which is the biography of the Starbucks CEO. And there are just, I think I must have quoted, probably on a monthly basis for about 10 years, different parts of that one book, because there's just so many lessons that you can learn from a decision that they had, which just has so many parallels to what you do. We've just bought, actually, for all of our team a book, and as to say, like, this is a book we'd love you all to read. And one of the team's going on holiday, and I just said, well, that gives you some holiday reading on the plane. And for me, that'd be great. That's exactly what I'd want to read on the plane. And then, podcasts, probably the other, because a lot of the podcasts are in nature, getting under the skin of people's actual stories and experiences. So that's the bit that really interests me.
What was the book that you gifted people? Was it the one Pour Your Heart Into It?
No, we've gifted them a book called Story Brand.
Okay.
Or it's from a company called Story Brand. I think it's Make Your Brand a Story, I think is the title of it. It's really interesting. So just a synopsis from this, but if you're building a brand or you're in a sales environment, their thesis is that everything in life follows the pattern of the same story. So if you watch a film, that film, whether that's Bridget Jones's Diary or Star Wars, has the same story. It's just different characters and different developments of that. And the reason that story is as it is because humans are predispositioned to follow, be engaged with, and have the emotional sort of buy-in to this particular story. So you have a character, you have a guide, you have these sort of doomsday scenario, which could be the world's going to end, or it could be that you're going to be single for the rest of your life, through to this huge opportunity at the other end, which is like, I'm going to be happily ever after married, or I'm going to save the universe. And how do you get there? And so what's really interesting is that you can apply that in so many parts of your life. So, and it references, if you're going to a dinner party with somebody, if you spend the first 30 minutes of that dinner party talking about yourself, then you haven't got to know the character within the film. And how can you take that character on a journey? And the character's also just going to kind of zone out. And so we are trying to, I think about great, either building a brand, and if you look at the biggest businesses you can then almost see the story of that business in this way in the world. Or if you're trying to just do a pitch to somebody, you have to be a storyteller, and you have to make sure that you tell a story that's compelling, that they buy into. And you could sell the exact same piece of content, but without telling that story, it won't resonate. So we want everybody, we're just passionate about everybody being storytellers.
What's your message that you try to get out to your clients, your customers? What is your internal story that you're trying to get out there?
I think that ultimately what we're not trying to do is go into somebody and change the assets that they have. I think to that previous conversation we just had, a lot of it is about helping them create the best narrative around what they already do. And in our industry, like a lot of people, I'm sure it's the same for many industries, have had people coming into them, including myself in previous lives, asking them to kind of invest in something else that will change stuff for them. Buy this new piece of technology, or invest in this new piece of content, and they're just kind of investing, and the pot of investment is getting big and the revenue's not. I think our message is like, you have a lot of great things today. It's about how do you differentiate that to the potential buyer that's trying to buy your asset, and we can help you tell that story. So I think it comes back to the previous story point.
And is that though? So you're working with the customer or the client. So as opposed to going in there and saying we're going to try and change this part of your business and improve it, you're actually saying let's understand what you're good at the moment, and then let's help you build on top of that and improve it. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's an interesting world we're in, because so we're a part of our business is a consultancy business, and part of our business is a transactional sales business. And within that, you get often people who will say, well, I'll give you a commission if you sell what I sell. Then in the middle, you have people who say, well, I'll give you a commission and a sort of a retainer to help us do it. And at the other end, you have, oh, well, I'll pay you to do a strategy, and then you might do a retainer, and you might sell it. And we're really, really passionate about, and it sounds like you should say, of course we would be, because there's more financially invested. We're really, really passionate about the combination of all three of those things. And it's not just because there's more cash, because ultimately you could get a much higher percentage on sales, but to properly sell something for somebody, you have to get invested into what it is that you're selling. And so by doing that strategic piece of work with them and unearthing the valuable parts, and then by sort of continually refining that and adjusting that and changing, it's not a case of just saying, this is what you've got to sell, we know people, we're selling it. It's a case of developing that story with them. And so that's where we've actually been, again, I think we've had great success, is to be able to combine a consultative and a strategic piece of work, embedding ourselves as part of their team, and then representation alongside that.
Interesting. And what's next for your business then? Where you are today, are there any sort of next steps that you're trying to take to grow it, or to, do you look to like acquire other businesses, for example, or take on bigger clients? So what's coming up?
Yeah, I think so. Going right back to what we talked about in terms of boxes, I think there are lots of tangential boxes that really help us and our clients if we're part of that. And certainly our US entity has is much more multifaceted in that way. And we've stayed focused. I think what we're looking at is a few different things. Is organic growth in what we do today, and then in terms of those other boxes, is where do we organically grow and where do we acquire, and that's fascinating and great fun as well. That's one of the things. That was definitely one of the things we both wrote down on the piece of paper when we were starting the business, was we want to be in a position where we're on the other side of the table on some M&A, because we've always been people asking for the money.
Yeah.
So that's just going to be a really exciting part of the career trajectory for us, really, in terms of those, we talk those personal progression.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's probably the next one for us.
Is that like one of the personal things that you're excited about going forward?
Definitely, yeah. I think like if I had a different career, I'm being sort of a fund manager or something, I would have absolutely loved. I love understanding the intricacies of people's business models and the businesses, and like even from a spreadsheet, often you can get a sense for what it feels like to be in the boardroom of that business just based on the profile of the revenue, and then just hearing their journey. That what we talked about. We both like to listen and learn about what's going on. Actually, you're constantly learning from the challenges of the people you're talking to about how they've got to where they've got to with their businesses, in the same way listening to podcasts like this. So it's fascinating.
You mentioned there about fund manager. So I work on the investment manager fund management side, and we sort of have this like hypothetical idea of how a business should be fundamentally sound, and what makes a good investment. But do you think that your experience of being a founder and knowing how to run the business, you understand that business, you understand how to generate revenue and grow businesses better than a fund manager, I'd say. Do you think that gives you a big advantage when you're going into those conversations to probably have more successful investments when you're buying a business?
Yeah, it might mean that we also end up sort of with low valuations in certain instances, for example, or really high valuations in other instances. So I guess being successful, you particularly because we're buying or acquiring or within a sector that is our sector. So often you will have people that work within their sectors. I guess with that. By the way, I'm not. I don't want to agree with that. We're better than the fund managers. That was your comment. But what I would say is that there is a real empathy for the day-to-day running of that business, and we get quite a lot of inbounds, and there's quite a lot of things that I see where I look at that and just go, it could be completely wrong, by the way, but I'll look at it, and maybe a negative actually is that you have your own personal bias where if you tried something that didn't work, you might just write that off when actually it could be a great idea. There was one recently where I was particularly critical because it was something that we tried and failed. Whether that means that it's impossible or not is the interesting part to that. So I think you could be better, you could be worse, but it definitely gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, because as being the investor, we are looking at the very analytical, trying to understand, is it basically, what's the debt like? What's the balance sheet like? How are they growing organically? And you put it down to the numbers. And then you also speak to the founder and you look at the person and the personality and you buy into the person as well. But yeah, you've got so much more experience you've been there and done it, and you've worn the t-shirt. You've got all the scars as a result of it.
I think the thing that is interesting is there are, even within one sector, clearly there are so many different business models. And so, even a services business to a different type of services business, they might generate revenue in different ways. So you do have to be really careful to not just use your own experience just to cast a view on they haven't got this much runway of revenue, or too much of their revenue is coming from here or from here. I think you have to be open-minded to that. But it's interesting within our business, because we have now in the broader business that we're part of, we have an M&A department that we would work with, and so we kind of bring those two areas together: the people that are kind of sector experts, and then the people that are experts in M&A itself and the financial side of it.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times the word challenges. So when you're listening to podcasts or when you're reading books, so you like to understand the challenges. Are there any challenges that you've faced in the business that you would like to share?
Yeah, loads. I think one of the challenges actually there's two that come to mind. One is, and again, I'm stating another phrase from Archie, so he'll be loving it again, but is making yourself redundant is really, really difficult in a couple of different ways. Former CEO of mine always used to say, he used to reference the hero complex, which was just like, is it that you can't make yourself redundant, or is it that you just don't want to? And then the other, because you're just, you think you can, it'll be done better by you being involved in it. But the other side to that is just genuinely in his investment discussion, which is if you were to make yourself redundant, that is a cost. What is the opportunity cost of not making yourself redundant? And that's a real constant battle, because you suddenly become, whatever you freed yourself up, there's suddenly something else that you need to make yourself redundant from. So that's always ongoing.
I've actually got a follow-up question to this. Again, I'm going to reference this guy, Phil Fraser, who came on recently, and he spoke about, we were talking about delegation, which I think is what you're also talking about there as well, but he was talking about the £100 an hour jobs versus the £1,000 an hour jobs. And as the founder of a business, as a CEO, etc., you want to be focusing on the £1,000 an hour jobs, and you need to let go of the £100 an hour jobs. And I think that's very, very hard when it's your baby, when it's your business, because you think that, particularly if you've built it from the ground up and you've bootstrapped and you've done all those things, paying somebody else to then take away that responsibility is probably quite hard when it is your baby. Is that something that you found? I
think there's a couple of interesting points in that. One is actually being aware of, in your own business, what time you're spending, what are the valuable tasks and what are the non-valuable tasks. I remember the first business I ever worked in, there was no communication to us about what clients were paying. So as a junior member of staff, sometimes you'd spend more time on things that were just not valuable. So communication through the business so that everybody understands, where time should be spent is really interesting. And then I think the baby piece, I don't actually think I suffer with that, but I think there are just relationships. Again, we're a B2B, we're a service business, that you feel personally responsible for, and things that you are often part of that sales process. And there's this thing you hear where often people go, the CEO came in and sold this to me and I haven't seen them since, and those kinds of things. It's just the worst thing that you want. So you have a genuine duty and responsibility to people that have trusted your business to do something. They often become friends as well as clients, and you're emotionally invested in their success. And so it's it's almost like I don't want to fail for this person that's trusted me when I've sold this thing to them. It's probably the main one.
That's a really interesting point. I've actually never heard somebody say that quite in the way you've said it, but it's a partnership in that case. Like when you're working with these people, it's not transactional. It's not they're paying you and to deliver a service. It's you want this to be a long-standing relationship with your clients.
Yeah.
Does that also help you to sort of generate recurring revenue from sort of the business side of things as well? That if you can create this long-standing relationship where you both trust each other, there's more probability that both parties succeed in the long term and it continues for longer.
Completely. Like, trust is the most important part. There was a period, I won't mention sort of specifically when I was working and I felt, not in this business, when I felt that I was sort of didn't believe in what I was necessarily selling myself. And then through that, I then started to think, this is an industry I want to work in and I can't put my name to something I don't believe in. And so trust is number one. And does it lead to longer term relationships? Yes. And also, expanded relationships. And that's obviously what you want to try and achieve, but not it's beyond it being, again, a sort of a cynical approach to that it's just about finances. It's actually much more beneficial to all parties to go deeper into relationships. If you understand a business, it might not even necessarily be in your vertical of understanding, although I'm going to go outside one of my boxes now. I keep using boxes because I can see the boxes in front of me. But actually, there's such a head start by them saying, look, I've trusted you with this. You get all of the internal politics around how our business works. You might know the different challenges and things we have, particular nuances to the way that we're set up, and so you end up sort of being deeper and deeper. And we've talked to a business recently that's in the services space, and they do 1-year contracts, and they've had some of those contracts for like 14 years, which is an amazing testament to what we've just spoken about. So hopefully we can achieve something similar.
Yeah. So we've spoken about some of like the business objectives, the business ambitions, but I want to understand like your personal ambitions and motivations and sort of mindset for a second. Now I know you've got a young family now, so what are your motivations for the long term personally? Is it things like family? Is it money? Is it status? So what is it that drives you on?
Yeah, I mean, perspective on life changes massively when you have children. That is like becomes that family, wife and children is number one. And I would say that doesn't sit hand in hand with a successful entrepreneurial life. And so you have this thing where you're like, well, I'm, if it's a successful entrepreneurial career, you're sort of doing stuff that will hopefully benefit them for a long period of time. But in the short term, you could be missing out on certain things. So trying to get that balance right is really, really important to me and to everybody who works like for us or with us, like number one priority. In terms of career side, I think it goes back to my reference to esports or FIFA particularly. It's that constant journey, and on that journey having fun. It's really easy to say that because obviously you can only have fun, you don't want to be having fun and things be really unsuccessful. But I bumped into some old colleagues at a conference recently, or lots of people from the industry. They said, all I hear from Archie every time I speak to him is that you two are just having loads of fun. It's like, I think there are points in like different career stops that I've had where the fun has stopped, but it takes a little bit longer than you would like to realize that. And so I think it's just like, if you can maintain like a funometer, you just like make sure that you're just always enjoying yourself. And fun means like working with great people, progressing, like learning new things, feeling like you're moving forwards and upwards all the time. Then there's no, as I mentioned, there's no end goal. There's no such thing as the end goal. So it's just keeping that happy medium of all of those different things, really.
That has to be the sweet spot in life where you can turn up to work loving what you do and ultimately getting paid to do that as well.
Yeah.
Like that, if you can combine those things, it doesn't matter how much time you're spending in the business, or even if it leads to this huge pot of money at the end. If you can enjoy going to work every day with the people that you enjoy spending time with, and it's also you're being paid to do it. It's like a hobby that you're being paid for, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, I can't wait. Like I love going on holiday, but by the time I get back, I'm really excited to be back in the office. Or I actually thought about this week, funnily enough. Like I was trying to remember whether it was my early career or at school where I used to get like that Sunday night fear. And I have a friend who works in another industry, and I just remember him always texting me on Sunday with this, like, I've got to get home after, like, we'd go to meet for a lunch on Sunday. I've got the Sunday night fear because I've got work tomorrow. I couldn't think of anything worse than that. Like all I would, if I was dreading getting up and going to work on any day, then I just wouldn't do it. I'd just do something different. So yeah, just you've got to find, and it's an easy thing to say, but yeah, work with great people, find something you're really passionate about, find something where you can't wait to open your phone to check if you've got, a new email from someone, and that's, hopefully you're earning some money along the way, but I think that's key.
If you were let's say, for example, things in the business changed and you started waking up on or you started going to bed on a Sunday with those fears, didn't really enjoy waking up on a Monday, what would you do?
I think in a previous scenario like that, as I say, it took me quite a long time to realize that was the case, because you kind of you're just in it. So firstly, it's like pulling your head above water and realizing that that's the state of mind or life that you've got yourself into. I think fortunate enough in the situation that I'm in today to be able to try and correct the course. I've heard over the course of years that people have said things like, I'd love to be fortunate enough to be able to choose to only work with people that we want to do business with, Now, so if you can't, you can't, but does that mean that you can change the top part of the industry that you're targeting or whatever that might be? So I'd definitely look to invoke some change, and make sure that you don't leave that to fester too long. I think just try and recognize that as quickly as possible.
It's hard though, right? So like when you're in it, and I think that a lot of people will be sort of in it and they know they want to make some change, but that change seems very scary. But the longer it goes on, the worse it becomes. The more unhappy you are, probably the more that you start to think that there are no other options out there. And again, sort of going back to the reason for starting the podcast, is I want to sort of showcase as many examples of other opportunities that are out there, whether that be getting a different job or whether it be starting your own business, taking that leap. And people, everyone I sat in front of took a risk, every single person. And that is the one thing that's very consistent, is that nobody got to where they are today by staying in a job they didn't like, or just continuing to sort of be on this journey which had plateaued, for example.
Yeah, I think changing job, whether it's at any point in your career, is probably one of the scariest things you could do. Firstly, there is the scary moment of actually telling the people you work with that you want to leave. That's like a personal relationship. There's that kind of thing. But then there's 60%, 70% of your waking life that you're spending doing something. It's not like you're just going to buy a new pair of shoes, and you're then deciding to go and do something different. You don't know if that's going to work out, and you build it up and build it up and build it up. It becomes this like, do I want to move? And again, people, myself included, but also people that I have, friends, family, that you just see so dissatisfied through to unhappy for such long periods of time, who then invariably, and you don't get too many where you meet someone and they move to another job and they go, it was bad move. Invariably it's positive, whether that's positive because they're earning more money or positive because they're happier, but typically it's just fresh. It starts. Even if that doesn't, I think the advice I was going to say is like, if that doesn't work out, you can change job again. You're not just stuck. Obviously doing a startup and doing something more entrepreneurial is tough, but again, if you've got a good CV and it doesn't work out, hopefully, depending on the job market, but you can go and get another job again. So yeah, that's really it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you made there, because even if you do leave a full-time job to start your own business and that doesn't work out, it's not the be all and end all. It doesn't mean that like you've failed, for example. You could start a business, it doesn't work out as you expected, and you go back to get another job.
Yeah.
That it isn't as sort of like defining as we maybe think it is from the outset.
Yeah, I think I I think I chose to do it at probably as risky a time as I could have. I'd recently just bought a house. I'd done a renovation, so I'd like depleted all cash reserves, and then went to having no income. So I was in that scenario when my runway, if it didn't work out, was actually like incredibly short. And I don't think I ever stopped to and my wife amazingly was just completely supportive, and she was like, you always land on your feet, you'll work it out. Like, well, I was like, but what, in my head I'm like, you don't just land that, you know, what if it doesn't? So I put myself under like maximum stress, but I also think it's not often that you're fortuitous enough to find the perfect moment to do these things.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, if you keep waiting for the perfect moment, you'll just never do it.
Yeah.
I maybe chose a very challenging moment, but from just where our personal circumstance was at the time. But yeah, I think waiting is not going to get you anywhere, really.
Yeah, I think one piece of advice that I received probably like 5 years ago or so was a guy who had started his own business. He said, there is never a good time. Ever. Like there's always a reason not to do it, always. And you had plenty of reasons not to do it. But looking back now, how grateful are you that you did make that decision? Yeah,
again, from a career perspective, the best decision I've ever made. I sort of it's worked out, you know, financially it's worked out, and that's important, but also I've never had greater job satisfaction than running my own business. It's just amazing, and doing it, actually I would say this is interesting, another interesting kind of topic, but doing it with a co-founder. So finally, I was researching this a while ago around there's lots of different things that say about, there's one piece I think it says like your businesses that are set up by co-founders on average have 165% of the revenue of single founders. Wow. Then there's and there was another one that said it was sort of, they got out of the startup phase. I'm not sure what startup phase necessarily is defined as, but something like 4 times quicker. But I've read other ones that have been counter to that. So and I think the research on this is mixed. But I would say it probably is find the right combination of skill sets. But doing it with somebody through the stresses of it, but also the fun and excitement of it, like somebody to high five when stuff goes well, and somebody to be incredibly panicked about when you're both nervous, but different perspectives on things, that just makes it so much more enjoyable. And we've just had the best time. It's been brilliant.
And also, if you're a sole founder, it's very lonely. And if you do have challenges that you're facing or wins, you know, how do you share those moments? How do you let's say, for example, you're having a bad day. Well, your co-founder can hopefully pick you up, or, you're sharing the load fundamentally. So I think that's some really good, but finding the right co-founder, because particularly when you go into business with somebody, you have to trust them, etc., and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, the trust is number one. And then I think aligned with that, I remember doing some management training where one of our businesses, the exec board, and we did one of those classic sort of psychology when you psychoanalysis where you put yourself and your personality into a different color. And so red was kind of
that dominant
character. You've got sort of the relaxed but the pensive, etc. And they were like, look, the ideal management team is you have somebody from each quadrant. You need the thinker, you need the somebody, a different one used an analogy in a different training we did, like you need someone to smash the wall down, you need someone else to come and build the wall back up behind them so you don't fall back through it, or that it make up this mess. So getting that, that's actually a really difficult thing to find, because most people are going to just do it with a mate or do it with somebody they know. I think we've been quite fortunate that we are really good mates, and we do get along really well, but we're also incredibly different personality types.
Interesting.
And that's, well, some things were similar, but it actually really helps to have it's almost like the one on each shoulder. You need somebody giving you those conflicting views, and then you have to both be open-minded enough to then come to realize which one of you should listen to in any one scenario.
That's interesting, because me and my best friend are basically the exact same personality type. We did one as Myers-Briggs test, like you said there, and we scored exactly the same. And we have also acknowledged that we can never be business partners, because I think we're just too opinionated, and we're too, I don't know what the best way to describe it is, but we wouldn't probably accept the other person's point of view. Whereas if you've got actually a completely different type of personality type, it blends very, very well. And was that, would you say, just lucky, or
Definitely lucky? Yeah, I mean, we've not actually had, in years of working together, a single disagreement.
Really?
Like not one thing where we fundamentally disagreed. Differences of opinion every day, because that's the whole point, and then you decide. But never have we got into a scenario of gone, I disagree with that, but I'm gonna have to put up with it. It's always been, actually, now I think about it, your point is right. And that was pure, like, I think that is pure luck. I mean, obviously we're cognizant of the each other's personalities and being switched on to think, yes, this should work well, and not just getting, two bull in a china shop personalities and both going and smashing all the plates up. But it wasn't as designed as it could have been in terms of how well it's worked out.
Yeah. This is a much deeper question now, but I've asked this to a number of guests so far to sort of finish the podcast. But is there anything else that you need to do in your life to look back and say that was a success?
Wow, yeah, that is a deep question. I still feel that there is. I mean, I'm young in terms of career age. I think there's so much more to do. I think there is something about that you mentioned something earlier about kind of recognition. I'd like to build a business that has proper industry-wide recognition as being like one of the greats. Just because I guess it's that, going back to that competitive part of it. I'd love to be able to, this is like really cliche, but when I tell the story to my grandkids about what I did in my career, be like, oh, that business, that business that's still going today and everybody knows about, I founded that business. I think that would be really, really cool to have one of those stories. So I think at the moment we're doing good things and we're being successful, but sort of industry or even cross industry. I mean, there are certain businesses in the industry that if I mention to friends, they go, oh yeah, I've heard of that, because they almost transcend. So I'd love to do something like that. I guess the question I have to ask myself is, and this is a really interesting, like, do you go back to the beginning again at some point and do it all again?
Yeah.
And knowing, and when you've been through it now 3 times, obviously one of those as a complete founder and 2 at least early on, you kind of know what that takes. So that's probably the big question in life for me over the next number of years.
Yeah, but so you want to create almost like a very long lasting legacy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that sounds really like I'm not sure, but it's again, it's kind of, I mentioned like being competitive with yourself. I remember when my dad always like saying, like, I was early in my career, and the sports industry is not a good paying industry, by the way, to start out in. It can be, but you've got to kind of almost, it's probably a hockey stick in the same way as, whereas others you can sort of earn quite well quite early on, and then it maybe doesn't have the same growth. And I remember frustratedly moaning to my dad, and like when I was in my early 20s, and him saying, I'm not worried, you'll be really successful one day. And I used to think, you can't just say that. And he's like, no, I'm not worried, you'll be like really successful one day. And then my mum would say the same thing. And then I almost had this like thing where I was like, people are expecting me to be successful, and I've got to kind of deliver on that, and I feel I've got the potential to do it. And it would be almost between that, like trying to live up to maybe some make your family proud and the expectation of that, alongside feeling that you can do something good, and being almost like you've got one career. If I got to the end of the career and I hadn't done something notable with that career, I probably would feel like I didn't fulfill my potential. And so I suppose, on that previous point, I want to look back and feel like I fulfilled the potential I could do with the one career that I had.
Yeah. What did your parents see in you, do you think?
It's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah. I want to understand I guess this is almost like going back to the start. But, but to understand like what you were like as a kid, I guess, like what was it that they saw, do you think?
So, well, a few different things, I think. One is, so my dad was self-employed, and he would have said, he would have called it the rag trade that he was in. So, clothes industry. And I used to sit in the car, drive around the country with him as a 7 or 8 through to 10, 12, 13-year-old, going to see him negotiate with wholesalers, going to see him sort of, they had concessions and these clothes concessions, and literally just like shadowing him all the time. And then at a young age, I would be opinionated in the meetings. Probably at like 9 or 10 years old, I'd probably be saying like, I don't think you should be buying that, or I think you should reorganize the way that that's laid out, or I'd be, so I think that was just part of that that character. But I really struggled to apply myself at school. I was just not interested in studying at all, but I did get pretty good grades. And so again, it was almost like I actually got grades where if I think I had studied, I could have got incredible grades, but I just wouldn't study. It just wasn't in my personality type. And so I have, to some degree, I have a bit of a like semi-eidetic memory where I just remember stuff. So, if I was mucking around in the class, I would have still probably been taking in what the teacher was saying, and then it would just come out somehow when I was doing the exam. So I think they felt that I was like this ball of unfulfilled potential in my education, but maybe that I would apply that somewhere and be successful in doing that. So that's probably why they felt that about me. That
I think will nicely, summarize the podcast, and it's finding what you're passionate about. Like, it's such a shame that we go into school and we put everyone in the same bucket. It's all about who can sort of memorize and and be the most attentive, and at the end of the day, sort of complete the answers that you've memorized the most. But what about the people who don't have the attention span because their mind is way more creative, for example? And it's about trying to get, I think, kids now to learn early on like what your passion is, and you've moved into an industry, you followed your passion, I guess. You said you loved sports, you wanted to work in sports, but then the business side obviously really excites you, and you say that you go to work every day and it's fun. So you're somebody who managed to direct, studying wasn't fun for you, but business was very fun for you. And it's just, I guess, looking back now, that you can say it was fulfilled because you managed to find the thing that you were passionate about and actually go and pursue it. Whereas there will be a number of people out there who would have found business fun, but they were still working for in a corporate environment, and they are still unfulfilled potential.
Yeah, well, it's been very, very enlightening for myself hearing that. I think the one last bit I would say is just to join those two things together. If you take sport, there are so many parallels with sport and business, and being part of a team. And so actually, the reason I think I find business fun is because those parallels exist. Celebrating wins together, being part of a team, having fun with your teammates, structuring what that team should look like. I've mentioned a few times. I just think that means that I can almost get as much enjoyment now that I'm sort of getting to the point where I'm no longer able to play sport. But it's just finding the things that make you tick, make you feel satisfied in life, and trying to look where in your career you'll be able to realize those feelings, emotions, opportunities. I think maybe I stumbled on that by chance, but it's been very interesting reflecting on it.
Yeah.
But
it's also just been really nice to just actually hear you talk about that, and for someone to sit there and say like how much they're loving what they do. And again, that's something that's been probably quite common across the guests that I've interviewed so far, is that everyone is enjoying what they're doing. And I think that is a big part of the puzzle that's been completed already, where if you can turn up to work every day, enjoy it, you're going to put so much more passion into it, more love into it. And also when you're going out there winning clients, you're sharing that passion for it, and they can feel that too. And it probably is half of the battle won, is just enjoying what you're doing every day. Full credit to you. And it's like I said, it's really nice to actually hear someone who speaks so passionately and enjoys what they do. And I hope that continues long into the future. And it sounds like another one of those things that you maybe the itch that needs to be scratched is the M&A side. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops too.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, no, thank you for having me on. And very interesting, because not often you take time to stop and self-reflect on these topics. So even just, the last couple of days knowing we were having this chat, and then through to the conversation today, that's just been very enlightening for myself. So really appreciate it.
We also do this in a room which basically has no phone signal in there. It's soundproofed, and like there are no distractions. So it actually, I think, gives everyone an opportunity to sit there and reflect and just have a conversation where like you're actually present in that conversation, which I really like about that too.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Cool. Thank you very much for coming on.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.